And so, with heavy hearts, we watched as Nkem and Oti turned their backs on the village and began their walk into the forest. As they passed by, the villagers bowed their heads, some out of respect, others to avoid meeting their eyes. The air was thick with unspoken emotions, sorrow, anger, and perhaps a sliver of admiration for the courage they showed in the face of such an uncertain future. The forest loomed before them, dark and foreboding. It was said that only the spirits knew its paths, that those who entered without their blessing would be lost forever. I remember feeling a shiver run down my spine as they disappeared into the shadows of the trees. Hand in hand, Nkem and Oti ventured deeper into the forest, each step taking them farther from the world they had known. The dense canopy overhead blocked out the sunlight, casting everything in an eerie twilight. Days turned into nights, and the forest proved to be an unforgiving place. They wandered through thickets, crossed streams, and climbed hills, their clothes torn, their bodies scratched and bruised. Yet, through it all, they held on to each other, finding comfort in their shared love. Nights were the hardest. The forest came alive with sounds, rustling leaves, snapping branches, the distant howls of unknown creatures. Nkem would build a small fire to keep them warm, and they would sit huddled together, their arms wrapped around each other. Oti would rest her head on Nkem's shoulder, closing her eyes as she listened to the crackle of the fire. "Do you think they will ever speak of us?" she asked one night, her voice barely a whisper. Nkem's gaze was fixed on the flames. "They will," he replied, though his voice wavered with the uncertainty that had begun to take root in his heart. "They will remember how we defied the rules, how we loved despite everything." Oti nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "Then we have already won," she said, her eyes closing as sleep finally claimed her. But as the days passed, the forest claimed its toll on them. Food was scarce, and water harder to find. Oti began to grow weak, her steps slowing, her breathing labored. Nkem watched helplessly as the woman he loved slipped further into illness. He foraged for herbs, attempted to catch small animals, but his efforts were in vain. The forest, which they had entered with hope, had become a place of slow torment. One evening, as they rested by a stream, Oti's condition took a turn for the worse. She collapsed onto the forest floor, her face pale and clammy. Nkem rushed to her side, cradling her in his arms. "Oti, please," he begged, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Stay with me. We will make it through this, I promise." She opened her eyes, her gaze soft as she looked up at him. "It's not your fault, Nkem," she whispered, her voice so weak that he had to lean close to hear her. "We knew this path would be hard, but I do not regret it, not for a moment." Nkem shook his head, his heart breaking. "No, don't speak like that," he pleaded. "We will survive this. I carry you if I have to." But she smiled faintly, reaching up to touch his face. "You have carried me in your heart," she said, "and that is enough. Live on, Nkem. Live for us both." And with that, she closed her eyes, her hand slipping from his cheek as she breathed her last. Nkem's cry of anguish echoed through the forest, a sound so raw and filled with pain that it seemed to make the trees themselves shudder. Back in the village, the elders had begun to question their judgment. The days had stretched into weeks, and still, there was no sign of Nkem and Oti. The villagers whispered among themselves, a sense of unease settling over the community like a heavy fog. Had they been too harsh? Had they, in their strict adherence to tradition, destroyed a love that was pure and true? It was on a night when the moon was hidden behind dark clouds that a strange occurrence took place. A thick mist rolled into the village, bringing with it an unnatural silence. I was in my hut when I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps approaching the village square. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped outside, joining the others who had gathered to see what was happening. From the mist emerged a figure, staggering and bent with exhaustion. It was Nkem. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt and hollow, but his eyes burned with a fierce resolve. In his arms, he carried the lifeless body of Oti. A gasp of shock and sorrow rippled through the crowd. "I bring her back to you," Nkem cried, his voice hoarse but strong. "You banished us. You turned us away, but love has brought us here. She gave her life for a love that you refused to accept, a love that your rules sought to destroy. He fell to his knees in the center of the square, clutching Oti's body to his chest, his eyes turned skyward, as if pleading with the gods for an answer. And there, under the gaze of the ancestors, Nkem breathed his last breath, collapsing over the woman he loved. The villagers stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The reality of their actions weighed heavily upon them. They had cast out two souls who had only wanted to love freely, and now, in death, those souls had returned, demanding justice, demanding change. The next morning, the village elders gathered. They sat in a circle, their faces grave as they contemplated the events of the previous night. Chief Obianuju, who had once been so resolute, now appeared a shadow of himself, his shoulders slumped with the burden of regret. "We have made a grave mistake," he confessed, his voice trembling. "We allowed our traditions to blind us to the truth of their love. We failed them." The lauded elder, Okonkwo, nodded solemnly. "It is time," he said, "that we honor their sacrifice and change our ways." And so, it was decided that the story of Nkem and Oti would mark a new beginning for Asaba. The elders decreed that love, true and genuine, would no longer be bound by status or lineage. No longer would the rules of the ancestors hold sway over the hearts of the people. From that day forward, love would be guided by the will of the individuals involved, not by the dictates of tradition. In honor of the lovers, a memorial was built at the edge of the forest, where their graves were placed side by side. A single stone was erected, upon which were inscribed the words, "Here lie the lovers who broke the chains of tradition. Their love shall guide us forever." Years passed, and the story of Nkem and Oti became a legend within Asaba. Every year, the village gathered at their memorial to tell the tale of their love and sacrifice. I stood among those who remembered them, their story a constant reminder that true love is a force that defies convention, that it is worth any price, even life itself. The village changed because of them. Young men and women were free to choose their partners, and unions between different classes became common. The elders, once rigid enforcers of tradition, now became protectors of love, ensuring that no one else would have to suffer the way Nkem and Oti had. And as for me, I carried their story with me, retelling it to the next generation so that they would understand the power of love and the courage it takes to follow one's heart. In the end, it was not the rules or the customs that defined us, but the strength to embrace love, even in the face of the darkest forest. Thus, the tale of Nkem and Oti, the lovers who defied tradition, lived on as a testament to the power of love and the beauty that lies not in lineage, but in the bond between two souls. And in that legacy, we found not just change, but hope for a future shaped by the hearts of those brave enough to love.